There comes a moment in some people's lives when everything they thought they knew suddenly falls apart. For me, that moment arrived on a cold Thursday morning. I was 72 years old, living alone in the same house where I had spent most of my adult life. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't particularly luxurious, but every corner of that house carried memories. Memories of my husband, memories of my daughter, memories of a family I once believed would last forever. My name is Margaret Hayes, and until recently, I thought I understood what loyalty meant. I thought I understood what family meant. Most importantly, I thought I knew my daughter. I was wrong. The morning began like every other morning since my husband's passing. I woke up before sunrise, made a pot of coffee, watered the flowers on the front porch. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my favorite mug in my hands. Across from me was an empty chair. For 46 years, that chair belonged to my husband, Robert. Even after 6 months, I still found myself looking at it. Sometimes I could almost hear his laugh. Sometimes I imagined he would walk through the door carrying groceries and complain about the weather. Grief does strange things to people. You learn to live with absence. You learn to smile through loneliness. And eventually, you convince yourself that life will somehow move forward. At least that's what I was trying to do. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Angela, my daughter. A smile immediately appeared on my face. No matter how old your children become, a mother's heart never changes. I answered cheerfully. "Good morning, sweetheart." There was silence. Not the comfortable kind. The uncomfortable kind that warns you something is wrong. When Angela finally spoke, her voice sounded distant, cold, almost rehearsed. "Mom, we need to discuss something important." My stomach tightened instantly. A mother always knows when trouble is coming. I just didn't realize how much trouble. For the next several minutes, Angela spoke as though she were reading from a business report. No emotion, no hesitation, no concern for how her words might affect me. Then she said something that made my heart stop. "The beach house has been sold." At first I thought I misunderstood. Sold? What did she mean, sold? That house wasn't just property. It was our family's history. It was where Robert taught Angela how to swim. It was where we celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. It was where we spent summers watching sunsets over the ocean. Every wall held a memory. Every room held a story. Yet Angela talked about it as if she were discussing an old piece of furniture. And then came the sentence that changed everything. "Mom, you don't own it anymore." The room suddenly felt smaller. The coffee cup slipped slightly in my hands. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't understand how my own daughter could say something like that. But what hurt most wasn't the sale. It was what she said next. "Mom, you weren't using it anyway." Not using it, as if memories expire, as if love has a market value, as if a lifetime of sacrifice can be reduced to numbers on paper. I ended the call before she could hear me cry, but that was only the beginning, because later that night, while searching through my late husband's desk, I discovered something hidden beneath a stack of old papers. A sealed envelope. My name was written on the front. And inside that envelope was a secret, powerful enough to destroy every lie Angela believed was buried forever. As I slowly unfolded the letter, I realized my husband hadn't left me a goodbye message. He had left me a plan, and the first step of that plan was something my daughter would never see coming. That night, sleep never came. The house was silent, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Angela's voice again. "Mom, you weren't using it anyway." The words echoed through my thoughts like a cruel reminder that the daughter I had raised no longer saw the world the way I did. Or maybe she never had. I sat alone in Robert's study long after midnight. The room still smelled faintly of his aftershave. His reading glasses rested on the corner of the desk, exactly where he had left them months before. I had never found the courage to move them. Some things felt too permanent once they changed. The envelope lay in front of me. For almost an hour, I simply stared at it. My name was written across the front in Robert's handwriting. Strong, neat, confident, just like the man himself. Finally, I took a deep breath and unfolded the letter. The first line immediately brought tears to my eyes. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, it means events have unfolded exactly as I feared they might." I stopped, read the sentence again, then a third time. Robert had expected something. But what? My hands trembled as I continued reading. The letter wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't a love letter. It was a warning. Over the next few pages, Robert explained that during the last years of his life, he had quietly noticed changes in people around us. Not everyone, but certain individuals, people who had begun to value possessions more than relationships, money more than loyalty, opportunity more than family. The further I read, the heavier my chest became. Because deep down, I knew exactly who he was talking about. Angela. Not the little girl who used to run into his arms after school. Not the teenager who cried when she left for college. But the woman she had become. Robert wrote that he loved our daughter deeply, yet he worried she was beginning to trust the wrong people, especially her husband. That sentence made me pause. Edward. Robert had never openly criticized him, never. Yet apparently he had concerns he never shared with anyone. As I continued reading, I discovered something even more shocking. Robert had spent years organizing his finances in ways neither Angela nor Edward knew existed. Certain assets had been protected, certain documents had been hidden, and certain instructions had been left behind for me, not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted me protected. For the first time since his death, I felt something besides grief. I felt curiosity. Questions flooded my mind. What exactly had Robert prepared? How much had he known? And most importantly, why had he believed I would need protection from my own daughter? Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky. I looked down at the final page. At the bottom was a handwritten note, a note so unexpected that I nearly dropped the letter, because attached to it was the key to something Robert had kept secret for years. And, according to his instructions, I needed to find it immediately. As I held the small brass key in my hand, I realized Robert hadn't just left behind a warning. He had left behind a secret, and uncovering it would reveal truths about my family that I wasn't prepared to face. The next morning, I woke up with the brass key still clutched in my hand. For a few seconds, I wondered if everything had been a dream, the phone call, the letter, the warning, the secret my husband had hidden for years. But as soon as I saw the envelope on my bedside table, reality came rushing back. Robert had left me instructions, and for the first time since his death, I felt as if he was guiding me again. After breakfast, I unfolded the final page of his letter and read the directions once more. The key, according to Robert, belonged to a private safety deposit box at a small local bank nearly 30 miles away. not the bank where we normally handled our finances. A completely different one. A bank I had never even heard him mention. That alone made me nervous. Why had he gone to such lengths to keep it secret? And what could possibly be inside that box? By mid-morning, I was driving through light rain toward the address listed in the letter. The entire journey felt surreal. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as memories of Robert filled my mind. He had always been a planner, the kind of man who prepared for situations years before they happened. If he had hidden something there, it had to be important. When I finally arrived, the bank looked ordinary, small, quiet, forgettable. Exactly the kind of place nobody would think to search. Inside, a manager greeted me politely. The moment I showed him the key and the authorization papers attached to Robert's letter, his expression changed. He immediately escorted me to a private room. That made my heart race even faster. A few minutes later, a metal box was placed on the table in front of me. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. This was it, the secret Robert had protected for years. Taking a deep breath, I inserted the key and slowly opened the lid. Inside were several folders, a stack of legal documents, a flash drive, and another sealed envelope. This one had a message written across the front. Open only when you are ready to know the truth. My pulse quickened. The truth? What truth? I opened the envelope immediately. Inside was a shorter letter. Unlike the first one, this message was direct. Robert explained that over the years, he had quietly investigated several financial activities connected to Edward. At first, he believed his concerns were merely instincts, but eventually, evidence began to appear. Transactions that didn't make sense, business records that didn't match reality, loans taken out under suspicious circumstances, and most troubling of all, documents connected to Angela's name. I felt a chill run down my spine. My daughter had no idea any of this existed. According to Robert, he never confronted Edward because he lacked enough proof at the time. But he feared that one day Angela might find herself trapped by decisions she never made. Suddenly, everything started making sense. Angela's recent behavior, the pressure she seemed to be under, the rush to sell property, the strange urgency in her voice. Maybe there was far more happening behind the scenes than I realized. Then I reached the final sentence, and my blood ran cold, because Robert claimed that if Edward ever disappeared, everything would collapse faster than anyone imagined. I stared at those words for a long time. Then my phone rang. It was Angela, and the panic in her voice told me something terrible had just happened. As I answered the phone, Angela was crying so hard she could barely speak, and what she said next confirmed Robert's worst fears had already begun to come true. Mom. Angela's voice was shaking so badly that I almost couldn't understand her. For a moment, all I heard was crying. Heavy, desperate crying. The kind that comes from someone whose world is falling apart. Angela, slow down, I said, gripping the phone tightly. Tell me what happened. There was a long pause. Then she finally spoke. Edward is gone. I closed my eyes. The words weren't surprising anymore, not after everything I had just read. Still, hearing them out loud felt different. What do you mean gone? I asked carefully. He left. Another sob escaped her lips. He emptied our accounts, Mom. Every single one of them. The room suddenly felt cold. Angela continued speaking between tears. She explained that she had returned to their apartment earlier that morning after spending the night with a friend. At first, everything seemed normal. Then she noticed Edward's closet was empty. His expensive watches were gone. His luggage had disappeared. Even his personal documents were missing. At first, she assumed he had gone on a business trip. Then she checked her phone. No messages, no emails, nothing. When she called him, the number had been disconnected. That was when panic began to set in. A few minutes later, the bank called. Several large transfers had been completed overnight. Their joint accounts had been drained. Credit lines had been maxed out. And new debts were appearing that Angela didn't even recognize. "Mom, I don't understand," she cried. "Why would he do this to me?" I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell her about the document sitting in front of me, the warnings Robert had left behind, the evidence suggesting Edward had been planning this for years. But I stayed silent, not because I wanted to hurt her, because I needed to understand the full picture first. "Have you spoken to the police?" I asked. "They said it's complicated." Complicated? Most of the accounts were joint accounts. They said he technically had access to the money. Angela sounded exhausted, broken. For the first time in years, she didn't sound like the confident woman who always believed she had everything under control. She sounded like the frightened little girl who used to run to me after a nightmare. And despite everything that had happened between us, my heart ached for her. "Mom," her voice softened, "can I come see you?" The question hung in the air. Just a few months earlier, she barely returned my calls. Now she needed me. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately. Another part remembered the beach house, the lies, the betrayal, the years of distance. But she was still my daughter, and right now she was alone. "Of course you can come," I said quietly. The relief in her voice was immediate. "Thank you, Mom." After we ended the call, I looked back at Robert's documents. Suddenly, every piece of paper seemed far more important. Because if Edward had truly disappeared, then this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning, and deep down, I had a feeling things were about to get much worse. 3 hours later, a car pulled into my driveway. I stepped to the window. The woman climbing out looked nothing like the daughter I remembered. She looked terrified. And as she walked toward my front door carrying a single suitcase, I realized life had just brought her back to the place she never thought she would need again. Home. But when Angela opened that suitcase later that night, she discovered something hidden inside that proved Edward hadn't simply run away. He had left behind a secret that could destroy both of their lives. The knocking continued. 3 hard knocks, then silence, then 3 more. Angela's face had turned completely white. I could see genuine fear in her eyes. Not the fear of embarrassment, not the fear of financial problems. This was something deeper. The fear of someone who suddenly realizes a threat is real. "Stay here," I whispered. But Angela immediately grabbed my arm. "No, Mom, please don't open the door." Her voice trembled. I looked toward the entrance. The person outside hadn't left. Through the frosted glass, I could see the shadow of a man standing on the porch, waiting, watching. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then my phone rang. The sudden sound made both of us jump. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A calm male voice spoke. "Mrs. Hayes?" "Yes. My name is Daniel Peterson. I'm an attorney." I frowned. "An attorney? How did you get my number? I worked with your husband several years ago." That instantly caught my attention. Robert, the man outside the door, was temporarily forgotten. "I believe your husband left documents for you," the attorney continued. My heartbeat quickened. "Yes." "Good. Then you need to listen carefully. Some developments have occurred much sooner than we expected." The words sent a chill through me. "What developments?" Before he could answer, another loud knock interrupted us. Even the attorney heard it through the phone. "Mrs. Hayes, is someone at your door?" "Yes." His voice immediately became serious. "Do not discuss anything related to Robert's documents with anyone." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Why?" "Because some of the information your husband uncovered involves individuals who may be trying to locate certain financial records." Angela's eyes widened as she listened. I moved farther away so she couldn't hear everything. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband was a very intelligent man. He anticipated problems long before they happened." My stomach tightened. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Mrs. Hayes, there is considerably more money involved than you realize." I froze. "Money? What money?" Before I could ask another question, the attorney continued. "We need to meet in person. Tomorrow morning. There are things I cannot discuss over the phone." The call ended moments later. When I looked back at Angela, she was staring at me. "What was that about?" I forced a smile. "Nothing important." The lie came easier than expected, but something told me Robert would have wanted it that way. For now. The knocking finally stopped. A few minutes later, I cautiously looked through the front window. The porch was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. Neither Angela nor I slept much that night. Around midnight, she finally admitted something she had been hiding. There were more debts, far more, credit cards, business loans, private lenders. Some of them carried her signature, except she swore she had never signed anything. As she spoke, the pieces began fitting together. Edward hadn't simply stolen money. He had spent years building a trap, and Angela had unknowingly walked straight into it. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, we finally went to bed. But before falling asleep, I opened Robert's file one more time. Inside was a list of account numbers and legal documents. Then I noticed something I had missed before. A handwritten note. Only one sentence, written in Robert's unmistakable handwriting. "If Edward disappears, trust no one until you speak with Peterson." I stared at those words for a long time, because suddenly I wasn't worried about money anymore. I was worried about something far worse. What if Edward hadn't run away alone? And what if the people looking for him had already started looking for us? The next morning, attorney Daniel Peterson showed me a document hidden by my husband for years. And the first number I saw on the page nearly made me drop it. It was worth more money than I had ever imagined. The next morning, I met attorney Daniel Peterson. The documents he showed me changed everything. Years before his death, Robert had created a protected trust. Most of our family's assets had never been placed directly under Angela's control. Robert feared that if Edward's financial schemes ever collapsed, creditors would come after everything. The trust protected the remaining wealth. More importantly, it protected me. Peterson explained that Robert had spent years quietly gathering evidence against Edward. The flash drive contained financial records, forged signatures, hidden accounts, and transactions linked to Angela's identity. Angela was devastated when she learned the truth. She hadn't betrayed me intentionally. She had been manipulated for years. But our problems were far from over. Several lenders were already searching for Edward. and some believed Angela knew where he was hiding. That afternoon, Peterson helped us contact federal investigators. For the first time, someone was officially looking into Edward's activities. Yet one question remained unanswered. Where was Edward, and why had he vanished so suddenly? 2 days later, investigators discovered Edward had purchased a one-way ticket under a false name. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. The next morning, I met attorney Daniel Peterson. The documents he showed me changed everything. Years before his death, Robert had created a protected trust. Most of our family's assets had never been placed directly under Angela's control. Robert feared that if Edward's financial schemes ever collapsed, creditors would come after everything. The trust protected the remaining wealth. More importantly, it protected me. Peterson explained that Robert had spent years quietly gathering evidence against Edward. The flash drive contained financial records, forged signatures, hidden accounts, and transactions linked to Angela's identity. Angela was devastated when she learned the truth. She hadn't betrayed me intentionally. She had been manipulated for years. But our problems were far from over. Several lenders were already searching for Edward, and some believed Angela knew where he was hiding. That afternoon, Peterson helped us contact federal investigators. For the first time, someone was officially looking into Edward's activities. Yet one question remained unanswered. Where was Edward, and why had he vanished so suddenly? 2 days later, investigators discovered Edward had purchased a one-way ticket under a false name. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. The investigation moved quickly. Edward hadn't acted alone. Several business partners had helped him create fake companies and fraudulent accounts. Investigators discovered millions of dollars had passed through those accounts over the years. Angela spent days answering questions. The process was exhausting. But slowly, evidence proved she had been another victim rather than a willing participant. For the first time in years, she stopped pretending everything was perfect. One evening, while we sat together on the porch, she finally apologized. Not just for the beach house, for everything, for the distance, for the arrogance, for ignoring the people who truly cared about her. I listened quietly. Then I forgave her, not because the pain disappeared, but because holding on to anger wasn't helping either of us. Weeks later, investigators located Edward overseas. His carefully constructed life was collapsing. The people he had deceived were turning against him. The fortune he stole wasn't enough to save him. For the first time, he was completely alone. Just when we thought the nightmare was ending, a final letter arrived, and it came directly from Edward. The letter arrived on a rainy morning. Inside, Edward admitted everything: the lies, the debts, the fraud, the years of deception. He claimed he never intended to hurt Angela, but by then, those words meant nothing. The damage had already been done. Angela read the letter once, then quietly placed it into the fireplace. Neither of us watched it burn, because neither of us needed closure from Edward anymore. What mattered was moving forward. Months later, the legal battles finally ended. The trust Robert created protected our future. The beach house could not be recovered, but many other family assets were saved. More importantly, something else had been restored: my relationship with my daughter. Angela moved closer to me. We spent weekends together, shared meals, shared memories. And slowly, we rebuilt the bond we had almost lost forever. One evening, We sat watching the sunset, the same way Robert and I had done for decades. Angela smiled and squeezed my hand. I think Dad knew exactly what he was doing. I smiled back. Yes, I said softly. He always did. For the first time in a very long while, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt hopeful. And as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I realized Robert's greatest gift wasn't the money he protected. It was the family he saved. Sometimes the people who truly love us protect us long before we realize we need protecting. And sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't wealth at all. It's the chance to find your way back to the people who matter most. Nearly 6 months had passed since Edward disappeared. For the first time in a long while, life felt almost normal. Almost. The investigation continued behind the scenes, and every few weeks Attorney Peterson would call with updates. Most of the stolen money had vanished through a network of overseas accounts. Some of it would never be recovered, but the authorities were getting closer. Then, one morning, Peterson called with news none of us expected. "Margaret," he said, "they found him." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Edward had finally been located. Authorities had tracked him to a small coastal city overseas where he had been living under a false identity. The life he imagined for himself had completely fallen apart. Many of the people he once called friends had abandoned him. Several former business partners had already agreed to cooperate with investigators. The evidence against him was overwhelming. When Angela heard the news, she didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She simply sat quietly at the kitchen table. After everything that had happened, there was nothing left to say. The man she loved had never truly existed. The version she married had been built on lies. A few weeks later, Edward agreed to a video statement as part of the legal proceedings. Angela chose to watch. I sat beside her. For the first time, Edward looked afraid, not of prison, not of losing money, but of facing the truth. He admitted manipulating financial records. He admitted forging documents. And he admitted using Angela's trust to hide his activities. Then he looked directly into the camera. "I'm sorry." The words sounded hollow, years too late. When the video ended, Angela quietly turned off the screen. Then she said something I will never forget. "I spent years blaming everyone except the person who deserved it." For the first time, she wasn't talking about Edward. She was talking about herself. And that realization marked the beginning of real healing. Just when we believed the entire ordeal was finally over, Attorney Peterson arrived with one final envelope Robert had ordered him to deliver exactly 1 year after his death. Exactly 1 year after Robert's passing, Peterson arrived carrying a sealed envelope. My heart immediately recognized the handwriting. Robert. Even after all this time, seeing his writing brought tears to my eyes. The envelope contained a final letter, one he had written long before any of us knew how events would unfold. Angela sat beside me as I opened it. The letter wasn't about money. It wasn't about property. It wasn't about trusts, investments, or legal documents. It was about family. Robert wrote about mistakes, about forgiveness, about how easy it is for people to lose sight of what truly matters. Then he wrote something that left both of us in tears. If you're reading this together, then you found your way back to each other. Neither of us spoke. We couldn't, because he was right. Somehow, through all the pain we had, the final pages contained memories he wanted us to remember. Family vacations, birthdays, quiet evenings together, moments that seemed ordinary at the time but became priceless later. At the very end, Robert left one final request. He wanted us to return to the beach where our family spent so many summers, not to mourn him, not to remember the losses, but to celebrate the love that remained. A week later, Angela and I stood together overlooking the ocean. The wind carried the scent of salt and memories. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Angela reached for my hand. "I'm sorry, Mom." I squeezed it gently. "I know." And for the first time in years, there was no anger between us, no resentment, no distance, only understanding. As the sun slowly disappeared beneath the horizon, I realized something important. Robert's greatest achievement wasn't protecting money. It wasn't exposing Edward. It wasn't creating a trust. His greatest achievement was making sure his family had a second chance. And standing there beside my daughter, I knew we wouldn't waste it, because sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't wealth. It's wisdom, it's forgiveness, and it's the people who remain when everything else is gone. The end.